Hello everyone, my name is Joost Poort and I work at the University of Amsterdam at the Institute for Information Law. And I'll be presenting today about policy consideration and the rationale for books price regulation, as well as some comments about book piracy. So, topics of my short presentation are, first I'll set the stage by discussing the policy intervention motivations in book markets. Then I'll discuss retail price maintenance in general. Thirdly, I'll move into retail price maintenance specifically for print books and ebooks. And finally, a few comments on book piracy before I conclude. So, setting the stage, why would one want to intervene in book markets? Well, from an economic perspective, books have two very relevant characteristics. One, books are entertainment products with significant economies of scale. Secondly, books are also cultural goods with likely externalities of consumption. One might even argue they're merit goods, which means that one expects the consumption of books to have positive effects, mostly beyond the reader, him or herself. And sense of merit goods, one might also expect that the reader, him or herself, is not even fully aware of the effects that reading the book could have on him or her. Now, classic motivations for government intervention in book markets in relation to the second argument are, firstly, censorship, in case books are expected to have negative externalities. Most European and countries all over the world had censorship at some stage. Some countries still do, and for instance, in the Netherlands, there is still one book which is forbidden, which is Mein Kampf by Hitler. So apparently, the legislator thinks that reading that book or distributing it can or will have negative externalities. But mostly, government interventions focus on positive externalities of books. Economic interventions are typically focused on the creation of books, for instance, by subsidizing the authors of books or giving them grants or prizes. Instruments can also focus on the distribution and production of books, for instance, by reducing the VAT rate for books or by enabling publishers and bookstores to have retail price maintenance, which will be the topic of most of my talk. Thirdly, interventions can focus on the consumer of books, the reader, and of course, public libraries are an example of that. The first notion about books, namely their economies of scale, is typically a reason why small language areas often have a more intense need for such interventions. Small kind of language areas, such as the Dutch market or the Finnish market or the Estonian market, minimum efficient scale for book production is much less easily reached than, for instance, in the German market or the English market, which means that there might be more reason and more need for government intervention or support. Now, two general criticisms to such interventions. Interventions tend to benefit higher educated groups or higher income groups disproportionately. Often you will find yourself in a situation where lower income groups are subsidizing higher income groups with these instruments. Secondly, the evidence for the effectiveness and the efficiency of interventions is often poor, and particularly that's the case for retail price maintenance. Now, what about retail price maintenance? General arguments for retail price maintenance and results from modeling indicate the following. Retail price maintenance is a very effective tool for monitoring the compliance of agents with cartel agreements between, for instance, manufacturers or resellers. Deviations from any agreements made on pricing are easily spotted or more easily spotted if retail prices are fixed. However, retail price maintenance may be efficient if service or sales effort or number of points of sales increases sales. So if people buy more if there are more points of sales, or if the service level at sale is increased, or sales average. And in theoretical models, retail price maintenance may or may not lead to higher prices and service levels, which means the effect on social welfare differs. It really depends on the parameters of your model, whether retail price maintenance will increase prices and welfare. Well, if models don't tell us what direction we should expect things to go, it's always a good idea to look at empirical evidence, or even a better idea. And empirical evidence shows that retail price maintenance most often leads to a price increase. But that doesn't need to be a bad thing. In combination with increased service levels, or increased inventories, or increased number of sales points, these higher prices could still enhance welfare. Now, moving on to retail price maintenance for print books and ebooks, so price fixing for books. The classic argument is that retail price maintenance allows small independent or niche bookstores, as well as broadly stocked bookstores that you can really get lost in, to survive by preventing large players and discounters or supermarkets from gaining market share via price competition. So without price regulation, the argument is that a supermarket will jump on any bestseller, sell it at a very competitive price at the checkout desk, and by doing so, steal profit away from bookstores which have a long-term strategy of remaining in the book market. And by doing so, by securing their profits, it would promote accessibility and proximity of books. So many bookstores and bookstores near you. It would also, is the argument, promote a diverse supply of books by enabling cross-subsidization between commercially more and less attractive titles. And this effect would be seen, or could be seen, both at bookstores and by publishers. So publishers would decide, I can make a better margin on bestsellers, and therefore I invest more in books with a much less certain return. And all of this originates from the idea, or the ideal, of what a book market should look like. Many small bookstores everywhere, nicely to go around and to enter if you have like 15 spare minutes, and to leave with books you never expected to buy. It also relies on good intentions of publishers and resellers. And the question is, does ex ante cross-subsidization actually occur? It's not a surprise and not a new thing that ex post cross-subsidization always occurs in book markets. And this is typical for any content markets, that you can't predict the bestseller in advance in most cases. So at the end of the year, a publisher will always see that they made a profit on some books and made a loss on some others. But that's not intentional to the extent that they would rather not publish the loss-making books in many cases, but they just don't know which are going to be the loss-making books. So the question is, does ex ante cross-subsidization occur? Because that's what this argument is about. And that is really an open question. Now, empirical evidence on retail price maintenance in, for instance, the abolition of it in the UK and a partial liberalization in Norway is typically inconclusive. We don't really know if it's, well, we do know some things about the effects of prices, but the effect on availability of books, the numbers of books published, and readership are much more ambiguous. Translating all of this to ebooks is much more problematic, because most economic arguments for retail price maintenance, whether or not they're valid, do not apply to ebooks as a separate market. For instance, accessibility and proximity of a wide network of well-stocked bookstores is really irrelevant for ebooks. Compensating small bookstores for stock disadvantages is totally irrelevant. And also the deliberate cross-subsidization between titles at the retail level is quite irrelevant, because any bookseller could basically have all books in store. Now, remaining arguments that could still hold in terms of ebook retail price maintenance is that a low price for ebooks would erode prices for print, because people would have a smaller willingness to accept a price for print if the prices for ebooks drop dramatically. So that's a kind of e-print entanglement. Same holds for the second remaining argument, is that retail price maintenance for ebooks would help bookstores, physical bookstores, to gain some market share in the ebook market, because they can compete with Amazon for ebooks while most of them are spending on selling print books. And that would help them survive for print, because they would make some extra money in the e-market. This again would introduce another cost subsidization, E2P, and it would also stall digitization in order with the intent to slow down the demise of bookstores. But then one should ask oneself the question, I think, well, who are we doing this for? Are we doing this for bookstores, or are we doing this to improve readership and access to books? And I would say the latter is the case. And then it's kind of odd to increase the prices of ebooks to improve readership. From a publisher's perspective, there's another argument, which I call the anti-Amazon argument, which is that they, as a group, they benefit from a diverse and fragmented retail market. If they can do business with a fragmented retail market, they might end up being able to charge higher wholesale prices, which might be beneficial for them. Individually, however, they have an incentive to circumvent retail price maintenance in case of kind of advanced expected bestsellers. They could do so by lending books or streaming them or enhancing them with audiovisual fragments, so that it technically is no longer a book and it doesn't fall under retail price regulation. So there are many ways for publishers, my point is, to circumvent retail price maintenance if they have reasons for doing that. And if you would enforce retail price maintenance to prevent all that, you would basically stall all kinds of innovation, because you would have a ban on bundling books, on subscriptions, all you can eat subscriptions of ebooks, etc. Now, last point of my contribution, a few points about book piracy from the Global Online Piracy Study we did a couple of years ago. And the research questions for that study were the state of the authorized and non-authorized acquisition and consumption of content, the motivations for people to acquire content from certain sources, and the link with enforcement of legal supply, and the effect of piracy on legal consumption. We did a study in 13 countries, 7 European countries, and 3 countries in Asia and 3 in Americas. And we studied 4 different content types. So we looked at music, films and series, games, and books. And for each content type, we distinguished channels of acquisition, authorized channels, unauthorized channels. There's quite a list here. For authorized book channels, it basically meant physical books, so print books from stores and from web stores, ebooks downloaded, and book streaming to the extent that such services actually exist. Unauthorized channels, in case of books, were basically illegal or downloads of ebooks from illegal sources. Other illegal channels mentioned here typically apply to other content types, such as audiovisuals. Parallel imports were not on our radar because the legal status of that is really complicated, and often if the consumer decides to buy a book from a different country, it's not illegal from his or her perspective. So we did not go into that. Study was financed by Google, and preceding studies on the same topic were financed by different governments and film industry and internet service providers. Just briefly on book sales, the left chart shows that in all countries in the data set, print still dominated sales largely over ebooks. But as the right-hand chart shows, growth levels in sales revenues are much higher for ebooks than for print books, which are stagnant or even decreasing in most countries. So over the period we were considering here, ebooks definitely can gain market share. In this chart, this slide, the left-hand chart shows acquisition of print books and e-books and all kinds of books from legal channels, whereas the right-hand chart shows acquisition from illegal channels. And on average, like 50% of the population in all 13 countries combined did acquire a book, ebook, or audiobook from any legal source in the year preceding the survey, or stated to do so. And for the European countries, we had two measurements, one in 2014 and one in 2017, showing that in most of these countries, the percentage buying a book in the previous year decreased slightly. The right-hand chart shows that ebook piracy is less common than buying ebooks or books from legal sources, but quite significant in a few countries. Decreasing in some countries, especially in Poland and Spain, but comparing with other content types, not decreasing as much as for instance, music or audiovisual. Focusing on the Netherlands, for which we did slightly different measurements with a little bit more detail, we saw an increase in book piracy between 2012 and 2017. And many pirates we observe are omnivores, but a relatively large number of them are only pirating audiovisual books. And the graph I show you here illustrates that. It's a bit of a complicated graph. It shows that about 25% of the population downloaded any material from illegal sources in the preceding year. And out of those 25%, about 18% of the total population, so 1 out of 5, 6, downloaded audiovisual material. Out of those people downloading audiovisual material from illegal sources, 5.8% only downloaded audiovisual material. So 1/3 of the film pirates, so to say, only pirate films. And the same holds for books. Of 7.7% of the population that pirated books, 2.3% only pirated books. For music and for games, on the contrary, this ratio is much smaller. So out of 12.8% of the population that pirated music, only 2.1% only pirated music, which indicates they're omnivores. And this graph to me shows that, or at least gives an indication that especially audiovisual, for audiovisual material and for books, a part of the population apparently is not finding from legal sources what he or she is looking for, and therefore turns to illegal sources, and only to illegal sources for that content, only for audiovisual or books, which hints that supply might not be adequate. The piracy rate is also increasing in higher age groups, we saw. So people over 50 years, people are higher educated, women are catching up. So the buccaneer, the book pirate, is more and more like average readers, which is contrasting with, for instance, pirates for music and audiovisual, who typically tend to be younger and not having as much purchasing power as buyers. So this social demographic fact shows that there might be more lost sales with book piracy in relation to ebook sales, because these people are actually able to buy books. Conclusions. There are valid welfare economic arguments for intervention in ebooks, in book markets, but the evidence in defense of retail price maintenance for print books is slim at best, and the case for ebooks is weaker still. Other instruments, such as a reduced VAT rate, prices or grants for authors, or subsidies, for instance, for digitizing the back catalog, may be more effective, more efficient, and less controversial. And then on piracy, while piracy is decreasing in most EU countries from music and visual, which I call the Netflix and Spotify effects, there's much less of a decrease or even an increase for books in piracy levels. Book pirates are more and more average readers who can afford to buy, and the effect of piracy on sales that we find is relatively high for books. And this might have to do with the time budget constraints, meaning that people can only read one book at the same time. And if they read a pirated book, they can't read a legally purchased book. To combine the two elements of this presentation, I would say there's a need for innovation and flat rate bundles for ebooks, like in the music and audiovisual industry. Thank you very much.